Hello and welcome to CNBC-TV18's Mumbai studio. I'm Sonal Bhutra and with me is Nickey Mirchandani. You're watching MF Corner. Nickey, education costs, they have been soaring, they have been going higher. And while the normal rate of inflation is 5 to 5.5%, the rate of inflation in education is double that number at 11 to 12%. In fact, education costs could double every 6 to 7 years. And if someone is planning to study abroad, there is a need to consider not only inflation, but the impact of rupee depreciation of at least 4 to 5% on a yearly basis on the outgo. Considering this massive increase, it is very important to plan for your kids' education. But how do you do it via the mutual fund route? And when do you start planning for the same? And is this a good time to do the same for any parent, be it any age for their kids? So let's get going and speak to the guest that we have on the show today.
Sure. It's clearly we're talking about a solution-oriented fund category. Let's get to know more about the details category and go across Suresh Sadagopan of Ladder 7 Financial Advisories, who joins us right now here with us. Afternoon there, Suresh, how are you doing? Let's start off with the basic. What is the ideal way to plan for a child's higher education? How do you calculate the amount you will need, considering the money will be used for several years later?
So there are several things here. So the first thing is the ideal way to start planning is when the child is born. And there are several people today who have realized that, and they have started planning from day one. The other constraint which most parents are having is that they don't know whether the child is going to be uh, aiming for medicine or engineering or law or something else. So we don't know that. But it's a good idea to put a certain portion of that investment for children's education corpus itself. So start small, maybe from the beginning when the child is born. The one of the things which I again want to talk about is a lot of people talk about children education plan. Uh, Children education plan is fine for those people who don't know, I mean, really how to put together a portfolio for children's future education, how to do the proper asset allocation so that they will get to the desired number. For them, the easy route for them probably will be a child education plan, because it's a plan designed for parents who want to reach a particular target. That, let us say the target is say 50 lakhs or 40 lakhs or whatever. You can actually arrive at what number you need to invest on a monthly basis to reach that target. But it may not necessarily be the most efficient route in terms of planning the child's education. Let us assume for a moment that the child is going to, for example, say medicine. Let us take a ballpark figure like, let us say 1 crore, because I mean, it need not necessarily be a government funded college. So if that is the case, then we will have to really work backward, and we'll also, like Sonal had mentioned in the beginning, there is an inflation, and if the child is going to go abroad, there is also the element of rupee depreciation. So we'll have to factor all that into account, and then we'll have to plan for that corpus at that future point. So 1 crore may become, I mean, the requirement may become say 3 crores by say 18 years. So we will have to factor that and then start planning that. So one more additional thing which I would say is that one is you put aside what you can today, but you need to top it up as and when you can. Like for example, when there is a bonus, or when there is an incentive, or when there is an increment, one should actually ideally top it up. Now, the last thing, sorry, this is a long answer. So the last thing is mutual funds are a wonderful route for doing this. Whether it is a large cap fund, mid cap fund, so that is really left to what kind of client we are dealing with, how much time they are going to have. I think we'll talk about this a bit later.
Oh yes, so we have that entire chat planned through the course of the show. But Suresh, you did speak about when one can start, right? It could be immediately once the kid is born. But do you think it is something that can happen at later stages as well, or it only works when you do it immediately after the child is born?
It is never, it's never ever like that, right? I mean, a lot of people wake up much later. The only thing is if you start at the beginning, maybe when the child is maybe 1 year, 2 years, then you have the time frame of maybe 16, 15 years. So then the amount of money that you need to invest on a regular basis will be much less, because the compounding can happen over a long period of time, and the amount required on an ongoing basis will be much less. But if you really wake up when the child is maybe 10 or 12, or maybe unfortunately if the child is at 15, 16, you are waking up, then you will probably end up dipping into some other corpus, and for most people it is a retirement corpus. So this is something that we find all the time with many of the parents who have not woken up early enough.
All right, that's a fair bit of comparison, but a bit more on that later. But since you have a long investment period, what is the best route according to you? One could accumulate this money. Is it children-specific funds that you're looking at? Would you start an SIP in your child's name, in an equity fund? What are the alternatives one can look at?
Yeah, so Children Education Fund is a great way of looking at it. If the person is not really very much aware, the person does not want to really fiddle around with a portfolio of mutual funds, and they do not want to get into asset allocation, they choose an appropriate child education fund and keep putting money into that. So that's one way of looking at it. But normally, ideally, what we typically suggest is you should ideally put across a basket of securities to take care of the child's education requirement. And I would really go as a planner, I would really go outside of mutual funds also to accumulate that kitty. Because we require a certain amount of stability. At the same time, we require a certain amount of growth. I mean, of course, mutual funds are going to give that growth. I will also talk about certain people putting money in real estate. I'm okay with putting money in real estate, assuming that somebody has, let us say, 10 years or more as an investment period. But I hasten to add here that as far as real estate is concerned, unlike in the case of mutual fund, I mean, there is no real track record to go by, because in certain areas, the real estate can give you order of magnitude return. And in certain other cases, it may give a very piffling, maybe a FD like return. So one has to be careful about how much money people want to allocate to real estate. I'm talking about real estate because a lot of people for children's education requirement also allocate in real estate.
No, that's right. And as you said, real estate does not have a benchmark, right? Right now, we are talking about that big real estate boom. That was not the case before COVID. So you never know. You did indicate that there are other financial assets one can invest in. We'll talk about that in greater detail. But within mutual funds, Suresh, what categories would you look at for investing for your child's education?
Yeah, you're asking a tough question actually here, because see, it really will depend on number one, the time duration left with the parent. It will also depend on the risk profile of the parent, how much these people are earning, what are the other goals, and when it is actually coming up. And if a parent is actually saving at the last moment, probably they cannot really go into equity at all, because I mean, equity asset as a general principle is very, very volatile. So, I mean, I would only broadly say that, I mean, all categories of mutual fund, depending on the time duration, depending on the risk profile of the client, we can invest. A lot of people also tend to invest in the child's name. It's a very interesting thing that people do, because they tend to invest in the child's name, thinking that okay, this is for the child, and I want to invest in the child's name. There is nothing absolutely wrong with that. But the point is, the parent is actually going to take care of every requirement of the child during their growing up years and during the education requirement years. So it is not absolutely necessary that they have to do on the child's name. So I would typically suggest a large cap fund, maybe a flexi cap fund, maybe a mid cap fund if the person has a appropriate risk appetite. Even an aggressive hybrid fund is something that we would suggest. In very rare cases, we may suggest maybe a small cap fund, maybe a thematic fund. So I mean, it's the entire panoply of mutual funds we are talking about. One more category I would probably suggest for people who are considering to send their child abroad will be international funds. International funds will allow you to accumulate in dollar terms. Though you are investing in rupee terms, it will help you to accumulate in dollar terms and ensure that that dollar amount is available for you. Uh, I mean, of course, we will all talk about in rupee terms, but the depreciation will not be a factor here. So, for those people who want to send their child abroad, a certain portion of their portfolio can also be in international funds.
That's clearly an interesting one, Sonal. Clearly, the depreciation bit is taken care of with this category. But Suresh, what are some of the limitations that you're also looking at with respect to children-specific solution-oriented funds? I'm sure there is a whole lot of category available there, funds available there. Can you give us some examples of just children-specific solution-oriented funds that one can look at closely at this point of time, which also offer in good returns historically too have done well?
So as far as solution-oriented funds are concerned, these are created for people who do not really want to dirty their hand, and they are really looking at one product to meet all their requirements. So the solution-oriented fund can be a savings plan, can be an investment plan, or any of the other variations of that. Typically, a savings plan is meant for a person who is somewhat risk averse. So a conservative investor probably will look at a savings plan, and probably a person who is willing to take a bit of risk may be looking at an investment plan. So these kind of plans, I mean, the only problem as far as this kind of a plan is concerned, this is invested from the long term point of view. And you know that over a period of time, there are going to be funds, whichever funds it is, children's education fund or any other fund for that matter. There can be lags and there can be points where we may have to do some switch from one fund to another fund. So if we actually lock ourselves in for a very long term into children fund, the point of actually doing a portfolio review and switching from one fund to another fund, because I mean we want to really have a proper asset allocation at all points in time according to the situation. So that may not exactly happen in a children's education fund. So that's the downside. But the positive as far as the children education fund is concerned is that it gives the parent that peace of mind that okay, fine, somebody else is managing, and I have done this, and it will accumulate to this roughly this kind of a corpus that I'm looking for my child.
Suresh, any kind of category of funds that you would particularly want to talk about? Talk about SBI, Magnum, UTI for that matter, Aditya Birla Sun Life, HDFC. Because if you look at the historical returns of the children funds, they've typically ranged between 13 to 18%. I'm just talking about this category specifically as a solution-oriented funds over a span of say 3 to 5 years. However, one notable exception amongst these names is the SBI Magnum Children Benefit Fund Investment Plan, which has yielded return exceeding 30% over the last 3-year period. Do you think despite this, it's important to note that there are several other mutual funds which have outperformed children funds in terms of the returns, and thereby one shouldn't just look at this category? Many mutual funds have consistently generated returns exceeding 12% or even surpassing inflation over the longer term. Therefore, these numbers may not be considered exceptionally, particularly given the exceptional performance of markets over the last 2 to 3 years. What's your suggestion out there?
Yeah, I'll go back to what I said. The main point is there are a lot of people out there who really want a simple solution. They don't want to be bothered about a whole clutch of mutual funds which they will have to manage on their own. So for those people, a solution-oriented fund like some of the funds which you just put up right out there on the screen, they will be good. So that is my whole point. I mean, if the market is doing well in certain areas, and if you really want to capture that, then you will have to be in that particular category, whether it is mid cap or whether it is large cap or whether it is international. And your child education fund may not necessarily be in that category. So that's a limitation. I would not really run down child education funds in any way. It is there for a particular reason. It is there for people who are looking for easy solutions to take care of their long-term requirements. So nothing absolutely wrong with that. But I mean, if you ask me personally as a financial advisor, I would suggest that you should educate yourself a bit, look at your risk profile, do portfolio reviews appropriately, put together an appropriate basket of funds, and even look beyond mutual funds to actually fund your goal. One
Okay.
more thing which I want to leave that thought with is that, see, as you go along, maybe when the child is maybe 12, 13, maybe 14, that is when you will really realize whether the child is going towards or inclined towards science, commerce, or any other field. You will tend to know at that time. So any kind of course correction that you want to do, if you have a basket of securities, it is much easier for you to do as compared to a child education fund. So that's
No,
my point.
that makes sense. Sometimes you don't know a day before what form are you going to fill, be it commerce or science, but we do take that point, Suresh. And with that, we'll do one thing. We'll slip into a quick break. On the other side, we'll continue our discussion with Suresh on what to do when you want to invest for your child's education, what are the different avenues available. So stay tuned for that.
Welcome back to Mutual Fund Corner. Still have with us Suresh Sadagopan. You were actually talking about, the whole idea of numerous factors, including individual financial objectives and the risk tolerance and investment time frame. Is there anything over and above, Suresh, that you think should be considered when one is looking to pick such fund?
Yeah, so one of the things is whether the child is planning to do the education in India or abroad. And a lot of people are thinking about even graduation abroad. So some people are thinking about post-graduation abroad. So, I mean, that is a factor that we need to consider. If we are really looking at, say, maybe mass affluent and higher net worth individuals or even middle-class people today, there is an aspiration of putting the child through education, foreign education, at least at the postgraduate level. But I think that is something that we need to, the parent has to keep in mind while they are actually planning for the education. So it is better to keep in mind all the factors, including the fact that there is going to be volatility in between. So and their risk factor, all those things they will have to consider. Yeah, one more thing that needs to be considered increasingly these days is that people are also tending to retire early. Somebody retiring at 42 or 45 is not really unheard of these days. So if somebody has that kind of an inclination, then even that needs to be carefully thought through, because then in that case, probably the income will stop and the uh, monthly investments that they are making from the child point of view will stop. So they will have to really figure out how they are going to fund the education, and they will have to prepare the child also that, okay, fine, some portion of the funding will come from the parent, other portion of the funding will come probably through a loan or maybe scholarships or maybe some work in the during the college education.
Okay. Let's talk about the other avenues. What do you think of Sukanya Samriddhi scheme? I know it's very specific to a gender, but would you pick it over a mutual fund? What can the returns look like here if we are speaking about that particular class?
Yeah, I'm very, very pro Sukanya Samriddhi. I mean, if there is a girl child and you really want to plan for that, see, I mean, you cannot really put all the eggs in one basket in the sense that it cannot be all equity for your child's education requirement. So if you really want to pick a debt-oriented product, I think Sukanya Samriddhi comes right at the top. So this is a product where the parent can actually claim that ATC exemption if it is applicable to them, and at the end of it all, the amount will go to the child, and the amount will be completely tax free, and you can roughly expect a 8% return. I mean, going forward in the next 10-20 years, we don't know where it is all going, but an approximate 8% tax free kind of return is very, very attractive in my opinion. So I think one of the legs on which the child education can stand on will be Sukanya Samriddhi. I mean, there are so many other things which also we can consider. Public Provident Fund is also one of the things which many people use. I mean, they start the Public Provident Fund on the child's name and they build it over a period of time. And if they have started early enough, the Public Provident Fund amount will completely mature and it will be available for the child's education. Of course, the bulk of it will have to come from equity-oriented assets. The education cost being what it is, I mean, a fair amount of money has to be put in equity assets to beat inflation and reach a targeted amount.
Okay, take that point. Suresh, we are talking about a topic which, of course, would be something that will cater to a lot of people. What are some of the common mistakes you see when parents are trying to save and generate returns for this goal? Something that you would specify or advise them to do?
So one of the things people don't realize when they are young, one is children's education, one is retirement. They don't really realize that the child is going to grow up, and at some point in time they will require lakhs and crores of rupees to fund that education. So they are in a kind of they put it away for a much later time. Most of them. So what we see is that most of them, even assuming they have started some investment, they are putting a very small amount for the child's education, maybe 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 kind of an amount, which if they have an intention to send the child abroad, or if the child is going to pursue medicine or something like that, even in India, it is going to be costly. So one of the things which parents have to do, and currently clearly I see that as a mistake, is they should start right in the beginning. The second is picking inappropriate assets for investment. There are a lot of parents who are, for example, they are very pro real estate, for example. They think that if they put money into real estate and at an appropriate time they can liquidate and things like that. I've actually had cases where they have put money into real estate. Real estate on paper it is giving a certain value, but they are not able to liquidate and they still had to take a loan to put their daughter through the foreign education. This is an actual case which we faced about 7, 8 years back. So appropriate instrument is the second thing. Then you have to take the appropriate amount of risk also. You cannot really wake up when the child is say 13 or 14 and hope to make up that by investing very, very aggressively in equity oriented fund in small caps and mid caps. So it has to be a well thought out, long term kind of asset allocation and portfolio that you need to create to be able to achieve that. So these are typically 2, 3 mistakes that we see all the time.
Suresh, I'm just going to be playing in the devil's advocate here by asking you just questions like, children funds. You've seen that it comes with a higher cost, right? Also, there is an argument which talks about the imposed lock-in period, which could be constraining. What's your assessment on this?
So I would say there are positives and negatives in that. So in any product which is there out in the market, there are obviously positives and there are some people for whom that product is absolutely suitable. So when you talk about a lock-in period, I mean, think about a person who is not able to save at all, and whatever they are saving, they are just taking it out and spending. For such a person, a PPF or a children's education fund or anything that locks their money in is actually it's actually a very, very positive thing. The second thing is you talked about the cost. See, for a person who does not really want to dirty their hands and they really do not want to put together a portfolio, or they are not planning to approach a financial advisor who can professionally help them. See, for those kind of people, I mean, that extra cost is fine because the product has been designed in such a way that it will help them accumulate a certain corpus in the period that they are hoping to accumulate. So from that point of view, the higher cost is in a sense okay and justified, and they know that there is a higher cost. So I would say that for some people, this children's education fund will be a good fit. For a lot of other people, it may not be a children's education fund. For those people who are comfortable with the headline that there should be a children's education fund, I say go ahead and do a children's education fund. But along with that, have other forms of investment so that you will be able to achieve the corpus that you want for your
Right.
child. So
Okay.
there is no one size fits all here.
It doesn't, of course. The risk profiles, the situations for everyone, of course, that differs. But Suresh, we do take that point. But the point is that you have to start today if you have kids for their education, can be by the mutual fund route and the other routes as well. But with that, we'll take your leave on this edition of MF Corner today. But stay tuned for Closing Bell to take you through the last hour of trade.